All right, everybody. So I feel that it's time that I address a certain way of thinking, a certain idea that I feel is very destructive to art as a whole. And it has to do with the nature of creativity and how knowledge plays into that. Before I say anything else, I will state this. Creativity is a mindset. Creativity is a form of thought. It has nothing to do, it is wholly separate, entirely separate from knowledge. You can be a very, very smart person and be entirely uncreative. You can be someone who lacks quite a bit of knowledge in whatever field you work in and be very creative. And the reverse is also true. You can know very little and be fairly uncreative, and you can know a lot and be very creative. Creativity is not subject to knowledge or lack thereof. Now, let me explain what brought me to feel the need to make this statement. I've got a friend who is a hobbyist composer. Let's call him Phil. Phil is not his name, but I think Phil is a funny name, so let's call him that. And so being a hobbyist composer, naturally the subject of music theory finds its way into our conversations because, unwittingly or not, I will use every opportunity to bring music theory into a conversation. Now, this friend of mine is one of those who prefers not to consider music theory in any form when writing music. And I completely understand this. I've mentioned many times in the past on this channel and in conversations with you guys that I do not believe that an understanding of music theory is a necessity for every musician. It's one thing to dismiss the study of theory just because you're not interested. I know I'd be a much better guitarist, for example, if I studied my technique a little more closely, but I choose not to because, honestly, I can play what I want right now, and I have other priorities in my life that I'd rather not devote that time to studying the guitar. But I don't dismiss the use of that study in any way. I just feel that it's not something that I would like to focus on right now. And so I understand that. But my friend had a little bit of a different opinion. He felt that music theory was not only unnecessary for him, but detrimental to a person's ability, not just his own, but to anyone's ability to be creative. This is a statement that I find to be logically incoherent, and it's one that I think comes from a culture that, at least in part, from a culture that holds up the creative process as this sort of mystical, spiritual experience where people are somehow guided by their hearts or some sort of inner thing to somehow reach out and know exactly what notes to play or whatever. There's this sort of idea in Western culture that you are guided by your feelings to create things. And, in some sense that's true. Artists are very often guided by emotions to create things. But if you think about that in a practical sense, all right, so you feel some given emotion. How do your hands know what keys to press? And you can say, something about the natural inclination to play differently or to write, in a different manner. So for example, if you were angry, my guess is that the music will probably be louder than you would write otherwise. But when you're thinking about like the notes or something like that, what are you going to pick? If you don't know anything, if let's say you've never touched a piano before, you have very little experience with a piano, how do you know what keys to press? you're not being guided by some mystical like spirit that like tells you, that connects you with the piano and tells you exactly what to play. That's not happening. Anything that you play that resonates with other people as communicating the emotions that you are trying to present is going to be either entirely a coincidence or something that you've picked up over time, that you understand that these certain notes or combinations of notes or whatever give off certain emotions or suggest certain emotions to the listener. And that's a form of knowledge. Here in my garage. All right. So my friend here, Phil, he basically believed that knowledge causes people to become sort of stuck inside of what they've learned, and it keeps them from branching outside of it. So, for example, the example that he used when he was talking about, he referred to scientists who are building things, and so he was like, okay, what if you know a lot about physics? Then don't you think that knowledge would keep you from trying to, say, build a bridge out of grass? Regardless of whether or not it's possible, he suggested that knowledge would keep somebody from even considering the possibility of doing such a thing. So to relate it back to music, let's say that you've learned that diminished chords cause tension and dissonance, and so he was suggesting that, if you learn something like that, you may only use these chords if you want dissonance and never venture out to other possibilities. Now, normally, when I hear this argument, it comes from people who have a flawed understanding of what music theory is. These people generally are led to believe that music theory is a list of guidelines or rules about how to write, quote, good music, which is not true. Music theory, if taught properly, contains none of these things. Music theory is simply an organization of the basic associations that we make when we listen to music, and it builds off of that. If you've ever written a song at a fast pace because you wanted it to be exciting, or at a slow pace because you wanted it to be relaxing, then you've used music theory. You might say, that's not music theory, that's just what comes naturally to us, but that's exactly what music theory is. It's literally that simple. And yes, there's more to it than that. There are certain like societal things. I don't know what word I'm looking for. Societal associations that we make. So, for example, we hear the bassoon quite often in forest scenes. So if you listen to game music, a lot of forest settings make use of the bassoon, which is interesting, and I'm not sure why. It probably has to do with a long cultural association with it in film music and whatever. But I think it's there are societal things and there are natural things. Regardless, music theory is descriptive. It doesn't tell you anything about what you have to do or what you should do or what you can't do or what you can do or whatever. It's merely descriptive. It's just a set of descriptors. That's it. That's all it is. Now, I don't blame anybody for holding these sorts of misconceptions, since there's so much bad teaching out there regarding theory. And generally, once I've explained this to people, they come to see the value in it. This wasn't the case with my friend, though. He understood perfectly what I meant, but he still persisted that his statement was true. I asked him, how can you be limited by music theory if music theory is nothing more than a description of our own natural responses to things? If anything, a solid understanding of the principles of music theory enhances your ability to be creative by allowing you to bypass the guessing games and understand with a much greater sense of clarity how to achieve whatever sound you're looking for in your work. It's like with transcription. I recommend all the time, I recommend transcription as a solution for pretty much any problem that you could possibly encounter. as a musician. But when it comes to writing your own music, I think transcription is so vitally important because it allows you to train your ear and recognize certain intervals and chords and things like that. And so when you have a song that's in your head, if you can do that with songs that you're listening to, then when you have a song in your head and you want to work it out, your ear training will allow you to bypass all of the sitting at a keyboard and trying to work it all out, and you can just get straight to making music. It's a similar case with learning music theory. So my friend replied to this by saying that while he understood that, he said, in order to study music theory, you can't just study the principles, you also need to hear it in action. And to do that, you have to study practical examples of the principles in action. In doing this, he said, people become preoccupied with hearing these ideas used in specific ways, and then they become incapable of applying them to new contexts. And I understand why he says that, because there are students who have been through music theory courses, and this applies to other arts as well, but there are students who have been through music theory courses who are often taught nothing about principles and entirely about practices. So traditional music theory education tends to focus on practices and certain conventions over principle. You're not told, here's what happens when you use parallel fifths. You are simply told, avoid parallel fifths. Avoiding parallel fifths is a convention. It doesn't tell you anything about what they do. And so people who have been through these sorts of courses often complain about, and rightly so, about how they feel sort of trapped and like they can only write that kind of music, and it's difficult for them to write anything else because they've been taught for 4 years or more that that's how you write music, and there's no other way of seeing it. And that's terrible. But again, music theory understood properly should not do that. And this is where I think his logic just breaks down into insanity. Because frick, man. Okay, now I'm thinking of like, I listened to Digibro's podcast where he watched every episode of Eromanga Sensei, and there was that dumb plot point about where this whatever character the name is, I can't remember her name, who could only draw things that she had seen in real life, who was incapable of drawing anything else. This is sort of the opposite of how my friend approached the matter. The logical conclusion to his train of thought was that in order to be truly creative, you needed to have as little exposure to any music as possible. He seemed to be under the impression that you only gain knowledge by studying it, by actively studying it, but that's not true. We absorb knowledge constantly. The person who writes their very first song isn't doing so with zero understanding of music. We spend our entire lives listening to music, years of listening to it before we ever even consider writing music for ourselves. And even then, there's already natural elements. You don't need to hear a song in your life to already naturally have the inclination to make your music, for example, louder and faster when you want to increase the level of energy. You can take a person, put them on a deserted island, raise them, you could take like a baby and raise them on a deserted island, never have them listen to music in their entire life, give them a piano when they're 20 years old, and tell them, write a song. And they will still come up with similar ideas on some level to the sorts of things that we do, just because of naturally inherent ideas and qualities. And now, as soon as you take that sort of idea, these natural ideas, and write them down on paper, and then communicate that to somebody, suddenly it's restrictive. So let me reiterate the point that I made at the beginning of this video. Creativity is a mindset. Knowledge has zero impact on your ability to be creative. Creative people are generally smarter than uncreative people, but knowledge of a given, of the trade that you are working in, of art or music or whatever, knowledge of that field and of how that art is generally made has no impact, zero impact on your ability to be creative. And another thing is about originality, because creativity and originality are very tightly linked. And something that I think is very, very important to reiterate and to stress is that you cannot be 100% purely original. You cannot create something from nothing. Everything that exists was built out of things that existed before. Nothing is truly original. Originality and creativity come from taking what already exists and using it in ways that are novel and unexpected. If you want to know why Tom Morello's guitar playing is so unique, it's because he's not emulating other guitarists like most guitarists do. He was emulating rap artists. If you want to know why Alan Holdsworth's sound is so unique, it's because he's not emulating guitarists, he's emulating trumpet players. That's creativity. That's incredibly novel work. These men are both regarded as very creative people in their respective fields. And what they're creating is being built off of the works of other people. That is knowledge that they are applying in a new form. Until you understand that, you will never reach your creative potential. If you think knowledge will restrict you, then you might as well stop making music altogether, because learning is inherent in the process. The logical conclusion to my friend's theory here, if knowledge keeps you from being creative, then first of all, you might as well stop listening to music altogether. Because if you want to make truly creative music, then you cannot listen to anything. Otherwise, you'll be picking up ideas subconsciously from other artists. Secondly, you might as well not write any songs at all, or at least write one song and let that be your one-hit wonder and leave it at that. Because when you write a song, you will learn things in the process of writing that song. And that means that the next song that you write, you will be approaching with the knowledge that you gained from writing that other song. And so if knowledge truly did make you less creative, then your creativity would logically drop at a rate equal to the amount of songs that you write. Unless, of course, you just write the exact same song every time, and even that's not creative. So stop blaming knowledge, music theory, or whatever on your lack of creative ability. If you want to make art, you have to work hard for it. It's hard. Being creative is hard. It takes a lot of time and a lot of effort, and it doesn't just happen. And the times when it does just happen in a rush of inspiration, it's still coming from other things. You can't create something out of nothing. So don't fear knowledge. It's never hurt you. It's not going to hurt you. That's all I have to say. This episode was brought to you by the generous support of my very creative patrons. If you would like to support this channel and support what I do, you can check out my Patreon page at patreon.com/Ongaku Concept. I've got a 27-page guide on a Japanese chord progression that is very, very popular over there if you're interested in checking that out. Thank you, and I will see you guys next time.